Okay, ready to dive into something epic. You know about the Great Wall of China, right? Thousands of miles long, a symbol of power. But what if I told you there's another wall system even bigger, like 4 times longer? Most people haven't even heard of it.
It's incredible how some stories just dominate. And others, like these walls in Benin, they kind of stay hidden.
These walls of Benin, we're talking 16,000 kilometers. That's like walking from New York to LA and back 3 times. The Guinness Book of World Records even calls it the biggest earthwork project before, machines and stuff.
And here's the thing. A lot of this huge structure was destroyed back in 1897. So we're basically putting together this puzzle, this almost mythical wall system from little pieces and old stories.
A giant puzzle, wow. And these walls weren't just around any random place. They encircled Benin City. Early Europeans who went there said it was surprisingly advanced. Planned streets, amazing buildings, even streetlights. Centuries ago.
Really makes you think differently about Africa before colonialism. We've got these accounts from European travelers, like Lourenço Pinto. He was a Portuguese captain back in 1691. He said Benin City was bigger than Lisbon, with straight roads going on forever.
Hold on, bigger than Lisbon. That's huge for the 17th century. What else did they say?
They were shocked by how organized and safe it was. Pinto even mentioned that people didn't even have doors on their houses. And then there's Ulfert Dapper, a Dutch visitor. He was really impressed by the big, beautiful houses, smooth walls. Each house even had its own well for fresh water. This wasn't just some random village. It was planned out, sophisticated.
It sounds incredible, and there's proof it goes deeper. The layout of Benin City, it wasn't random. They used something called fractal design.
Exactly. Fractals are like these patterns you see everywhere in nature, a tree branching out, or a snowflake. They're complex, but they keep repeating.
So they use this complex math in their city.
Yeah. And this is where it gets really interesting. See, when Europeans first saw this architecture, they just didn't get it. They called it primitive, disorganized, because they were looking at it through their own math ideas.
Wait, what's that word you used?
Ethnomathematician. They study how math and culture connect. In this case, this guy, Ronnie Glash, he says Europeans completely missed the point. The Benin people were using a kind of math, fractals, that Europeans hadn't even discovered yet.
Wow, that's a powerful example of how, cultural biases can change how we see the world. We're talking about a kingdom going back to the 11th century, built this massive wall system, and then designs its capital with advanced math that Europeans wouldn't figure out for centuries. It's mind-blowing.
It really shows you how ingenious and sophisticated the Benin people were, and we can't forget about the scale of the walls. 16,000 kilometers, built with local materials, local people. The writer Fred Pius, in an article for New Scientist, he thinks it took 150 million hours of digging. Think about that level of organization, all that labor.
That's more than everyone in California digging for a whole week. But seriously, how did they do it? Something so big.
It's a question that keeps fascinating historians and archaeologists. We know the Benin Kingdom was strong in West Africa for centuries. They had a social system and a good trade network. That would have given them resources, manpower for big projects like this. But the exact methods, how they organized it all, that's still being researched.
Makes you want to grab a shovel and start digging yourself.
Right. Speaking of digging deeper, we actually started making some cool visual stuff on our YouTube channel. It really helps bring these deep dives to life.
Wait, seriously? Tell me more.
Imagine, you can actually see the Benin walls, artifacts from Benin City. We even have 3D models of what the city might have looked like, all while we're talking about them.
That sounds incredible. It would definitely take our explorations to a whole new level.
Exactly. So if you like this and you want to see this stuff for yourself, go to our YouTube channel, subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell. You won't miss any of our visual deep dives.
I'll be the first to subscribe. Can't wait. To everyone listening, trust me, it's worth it. Okay, back to the walls of Benin. We talked about how big they are, the advanced city they protected, but there's a lot more to discover.
Absolutely. One big mystery is their exact length. Some say 16,000 kilometers. Like we said, 4 times the Great Wall. But even that number, we're not totally sure.
And remember, a big part of these walls, they were destroyed. So what we know, it comes from little pieces and stories from those early travelers. Maybe there are parts of the walls still out there, under all the plants, just waiting.
It's a cool thought, isn't it, that such a huge structure could still be hidden. It really shows you how big history is, how much we still don't know about the past.
Makes you wonder what else is out there, waiting to be found. But before we get lost on lost cities, we have to talk about how Benin City declined. What happened?
Yeah, it's a key part of the story. Back in the 15th century, the Benin Empire, they started having problems. Internal and external, conflicts at their borders. And then you have the growing power of Europe,
Yeah.
especially with the transatlantic slave trade. That put a lot of pressure on the kingdom.
That time was a tragic turning point for a lot of African societies, including Benin.
For sure. And we won't go into all the details of the slave trade here, but it's important to acknowledge how devastating it was for the Benin Empire. Their economy, communities torn apart, and it all contributed to their decline.
It's a reminder of the dark side of history. What about Benin City itself? What caused its destruction?
The final blow came in 1897, the British Punitive Expedition. British forces wanted to control trade and resources. They attacked Benin City. It was brutal.
Sounds awful.
It was. They stole countless artifacts, including the Benin bronzes. Those were taken back to Europe. They burned buildings, and big parts of those incredible walls we've been talking about, they were torn down. Such a huge loss of culture.
A real tragedy. But even though they were destroyed, the legacy of the Benin walls, it's still here. They show us the ingenuity of the Benin people, their skills, their culture. What can we learn from this lost wonder? And how should we think about it today?
That's a great question, one that deserves some thought. The walls of Benin, they challenge how we understand African history and civilization. They remind us that Africa has this rich past. It goes way beyond what you usually read in Western books. We have to confront the effects of colonialism and how important it is to preserve culture.
And the story of the Benin walls, it isn't over. People are working to protect and rebuild what's left and to research their history more.
Exactly. Organizations like the Legacy Restoration Trust, they're working so hard to protect and restore these places. And there's the effort to get the Benin bronzes back from museums in Europe. Send them home. These are crucial steps for reclaiming Benin's culture and making sure its legacy is shared with everyone.
It reminds us that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It shapes us now, and it influences our future. The story of the Benin walls, the good and the bad, and the work to preserve them, it's a story that's still happening. But for now, let's take a short break. We'll be back soon. We'll dive even deeper into the mysteries and legacy of this amazing lost wonder. Stay tuned.
As we go deeper into this, the walls of Benin, it's important to remember they weren't just like a big building project.
Right.
They were more than that, a symbol. Power, culture, a whole community coming together.
Exactly. To build something that massive, it takes more than just an order from a king.
Oh, yeah.
Generations working together, passing on knowledge, the skills, the whole purpose. It's hard to even imagine how they organized all that.
And if we zoom out a bit, we see these walls weren't unique in Africa.
Oh, right.
You had other impressive cities, structures,
Yeah.
like Great Zimbabwe in the south, or the ancient city of Kano in Nigeria, walled cities.
Right.
These examples, they really challenge that Eurocentric view. The one that's always in our history books.
Yeah.
It reminds us that Africa, it's got this long history of building and creating cities.
It's like we're putting together this new puzzle.
But
But the pieces are spread all over the continent.
right.
And each piece tells a story. Innovation, resilience, culture. It all deserves to be explored and understood.
I agree. And it's so important to remember these civilizations, they weren't isolated.
Right.
They were connected through trade, diplomacy, sharing ideas. The walls of Benin, for example, they weren't just a barrier.
Yeah.
They were part of this bigger network, trade, culture, people, and goods moving.
Yeah.
But also a symbol of power, for the kingdom.
So they weren't just keeping people out, they were welcoming them in too.
Exactly. Just like a busy city today. Protected, but also a place where people connect, share stories, do business.
Makes sense. But as we said, the Benin Kingdom, it had its problems. Internal, external. Things that led to its decline. And one of the darkest chapters, not just for Benin, but for many African nations, the transatlantic slave trade.
It's a dark and complicated part of history. We can't ignore it.
So how did the slave trade affect Benin? A kingdom we've seen was so advanced.
We got to remember Benin's role in that trade, it was often forced on them or influenced, by European powers.
Right.
The demand for slaves, it created this terrible system, exploitation, communities torn apart, economies destroyed, so much suffering.
Yeah.
Benin did take part. But it's important to understand why, the history behind it,
Yeah.
and the role Europeans played in making it happen.
This shows us that we have to look at history, the whole picture, the achievements and the injustices.
I agree.
And for Benin, the slave trade, it really weakened them, made them vulnerable, contributed to their downfall.
And that leads us to 1897, the British Punitive Expedition.
Right.
It wasn't just a military loss, it was a cultural disaster. The deaths, The looting, the destruction of those walls we've been talking about, it was intentional, trying to erase Benin's culture, to show British power.
It's heartbreaking to think about all that destruction.
It is.
And it makes you think, how do we value and protect culture, especially when it's been affected by colonialism?
The destruction of Benin City, it wasn't unique. Throughout history, so much culture has been stolen, destroyed, or just forgotten because of war, neglect, or deliberate erasure.
Right.
It's a global problem. We need a global response to recognize how important culture is and to work to save it.
You're right. It's not just about preserving the past. It's about understanding how it shapes who we are and what we become. It's about recognizing that all cultures are connected, and we need to respect different perspectives, make sure history is told from many sides.
And part of that, it means supporting people who are rebuilding and reclaiming their heritage, like getting the Benin bronzes back.
Exactly. Returning those stolen artifacts. It's powerful. It's about cultural restitution, trying to heal from the past.
Yep.
It shows that we understand the wrongs of colonialism, and we're trying to fix them. It also says that culture belongs to the people it came from, and they should have a say in how it's preserved and shared.
I agree. And even though they're damaged, those walls of Benin, they still tell us a lot.
They do.
They tell a story.
Yeah.
About human ingenuity, community, a civilization that thrived even with all the challenges.
They challenge what we think we know about history, remind us to look beyond the usual stories, to see the richness and diversity of human experience.
Yes.
And they inspire us to keep digging deeper, to uncover those hidden stories, the truths that are waiting to be found.
So thinking about the walls of Benin, what do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to take away? What should they think about?
It makes you think, history, it's not set in stone. It changes. As we find new stuff, ask new questions, see the past in different ways, just like those parts of the Benin walls, maybe still out there, hidden, waiting for someone to find them.
Yeah, it reminds us that there are still so many mysteries out there, untold stories, waiting for someone curious enough to uncover them.
So exciting to think about all the secrets, the surprises. Who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be the one to make the next big discovery, find a hidden wonder, and change how we see the past.
It should be amazing. Imagine that thrill, making those connections, discovering something new.
It reminds us that we're all part of this huge story, human history. We can all help understand the past and shape the future. The Benin walls, even broken, they still tell us so much about ingenuity, community, and the connection we have to the people who came before us.
Their story, it shows how resilient humans are, our ability to create, to overcome problems, to leave a legacy that inspires us centuries later.
Exactly. They tell us to look beyond the usual stories, to see how diverse and rich human experience really is. There's always more to learn, more to understand, about how complex our world is, past and present.
That's a great message for our listeners. Be curious. Ask questions. Don't just accept what you're told. And never stop exploring. Our world is full of wonders just waiting to be found.
I agree. So to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deep. You never know what you might find out there.
And never lose that sense of wonder.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.